The vast galactic council chamber loomed over the gathered delegates, a cathedral of polished obsidian and cold, unfeeling steel. Its vaulted ceilings, etched with the insignias of 100 species, bore silent witness to yet another demand for subjugation. The air carried a charged stillness, broken only by the resonant voice of the Jatari Dominion's ruler. Supreme Overlord Througte stood at the center, his elongated, crimson-hued form clad in ceremonial battle regalia. His golden carapace gleamed under the chamber's sterile lighting, his compound eyes narrowing with predatory amusement. His mandibles clicked, amplifying his condescension. "We have been generous, Commander Voss," he declared, his voice a guttural reverberation. "Your people have been granted time. Time to kneel, time to submit, time to avoid annihilation." At the opposite end of the chamber, Commander Elias Voss remained motionless, arms clasped behind his back. He was a man carved from war itself, his face weathered, his steel-gray eyes devoid of fear. His uniform, crisp but unadorned, bore no unnecessary embellishments. He had no need for medals. His reputation spoke for itself. Seated beside him, General Hadrian Locke exhaled sharply, an edge of restrained fury in his stance. A younger officer might have interrupted, might have barked back at the alien tyrant's arrogance. But Hadrian, like Voss, had long since learned that silence often wielded more weight than words. Throughte's mandibles flared in amusement at the lack of immediate response. He took a deliberate step forward, talons clicking against the council floor. "Do not mistake our patience for weakness," he continued, his tone darkening. "Our war fleets are already mobilized. Your colonies will be reduced to husks, your cities burned, your leaders dragged through the streets like vermin. There will be no mercy." A ripple of murmurs passed through the assembled delegates, envoys from neutral civilizations, none willing to intervene, all waiting to see if humanity would be yet another empire crushed beneath the Dominion's might. Still, Voss did not move. Througte exhaled sharply. "Say something, human." Voss's voice, when it came, was measured steel. "I was waiting to see if you had anything of value to say." A hushed silence fell over the chamber. Throute's mandibles twitched. Voss took a single step forward, his presence pressing against the air itself. "We've seen what your kind does to those who submit. We saw it on Luthor 9, where your mercy left millions impaled on city spires. We saw it on Caesari Prime, where surrender meant enslavement." His voice remained even, yet it carried a weight that ground against the pretense of diplomacy. "Humanity will not kneel. If you come, we will break you." The Overlord's claws flexed, his amusement flickering into something colder. "Then you have chosen extinction." Voss held his gaze. "No, I have chosen war." A sharp chime echoed through the chamber, a declaration of hostilities formally logged into the annals of intergalactic law. The Council, bound by neutrality, would not interfere. The Jatari had declared their intent. Humanity had answered. Througte exuded a slow, clicking breath, his compound eyes locking onto Voss as if memorizing the face of his enemy. Then, without another word, he turned. His elite guard fell into formation around him, their towering frames vanishing through the chamber's exit. Only when they were gone did Hadrian speak. "They expect this to be quick." Voss's expression remained unreadable. "Then they've made their first mistake." Within hours, Jatari war fleets ignited the void. Swarms of serrated warships, their insectoid hulls bristling with kinetic lances and plasma artillery, descended upon the outlying human colonies. Their advance was swift, methodical, until it wasn't. From the depths of orbital shadows, humanity's fleets emerged, not in open confrontation, but in calculated ambushes. EMP detonations rendered Jatari navigational systems blind. Quantum dissonance mines tore through their formations. And when the first planetary invasions began, the Jatari learned that human warfare was not one of direct engagement, but of attrition, deception, and unrelenting precision. On Outpost Hadrian, a supposed weak point in human defenses, Jatari ground forces descended in droves, only to find themselves in a city of ghosts and traps. Streets collapsed beneath their forces, sending entire battalions into the molten depths of sabotaged geothermal plants. Automated drones, armed with hunter-killer protocols, tore through their ranks. And when Jatari generals demanded reinforcement, they received only static. The Dominion had expected subjugation. What they encountered was systematic extermination. In the war room aboard the HSS Judicator, the command center of humanity's counteroffensive, Voss stood before the holographic display of the ongoing battlefronts. The initial engagements had gone precisely as planned. The Jatari were arrogant, predictable, and now they were bleeding. Hadrian studied the casualty reports. They're losing faster than they realize. Voss nodded. But they won't stop. Not yet. A transmission flickered to life. A Jatari sub-commander, his once imperious posture, now marred with the tremor of doubt, glared through the screen. "Your tactics are cowardly," he snarled. "Face us in true combat." Voss's expression didn't change. "True combat? You mean the kind where your fleets descend upon defenseless cities? The kind where you enslave those who surrender?" He took a slow breath, his tone turning almost conversational. "No, you don't get that war." The Jatari commander bristled. "Then what war do we get?" Voss leaned forward. "The kind that ends with your king dragged through the streets." The transmission cut. Silence filled the command room. Hadrian exhaled. "You think Kralzov will stay on the front lines?" No. Voss turned toward the star map, tracing a path toward the Jatari homeworld. But soon, he won't have a choice. As the Judicator moved into formation, the next phase began. The war had only just started, and humanity had no intention of merely winning. They intended to end it. The fall of Arden Prime. The air on Arden Prime was thick with smoke and the stench of burning metal. What had once been a thriving human colony was now a shattered war zone. Jatari war beasts, massive, cybernetically enhanced creatures bred for planetary domination, stalked the ruined streets, their chitinous armor gleaming under the flickering embers of a dying city. Jatari foot soldiers, clad in segmented battle plating, moved in disciplined phalanxes, their pulse rifles sweeping for survivors. Atop a crumbling skyscraper, General Hadrian Locke lay prone, his eye pressed against the scope of a long-range rail rifle. Below, a Jatari command crawler, a hulking mobile fortress, crept through the city's remains. The Dominion's Field Marshal Zilrath stood at its helm, barking orders through a translator drone. Locke's voice crackled through his comlink. Target acquired. Commander Elias Voss, stationed aboard the orbiting HSS Judicator, responded. Execute. Locke exhaled. The rail rifle hummed. A single, high-velocity round tore through the atmosphere, traveling at hypersonic speed. It struck Zilrath's cranium, splitting his reinforced skull in two. For a moment, the entire Jatari advance hesitated. Then the sky fell. Orbital bombardment rained down, targeting enemy positions with ruthless precision. The Judicator's magnetic acceleration cannons, MAX, unleashed kinetic rods that struck with the force of meteor impacts. The Jatari command crawler was vaporized in an instant. What had been an invasion became a massacre. The Jatari had expected resistance. They had not expected humanity's response to be systematic annihilation. On the bridge of the Judicator, Voss watched the carnage unfold through a live holo feed. Hadrian's strike teams were clearing the last remnants of enemy forces, methodically eliminating stragglers. A Jatari tactical transmission, intercepted and decrypted, played on the secondary screen. The guttural voice of a Dominion officer, tinged with growing unease, barked. "We have lost control of the eastern quadrant. Reinforcements are not responding. Human resistance is unprecedented." Voss turned to his chief strategist, Colonel Isaac Grayson. "What's the projection?" Grayson studied the battlefield data. "Their fleet is still holding in orbit, but their ground forces are disorganized. Their command structure is collapsing. Voss nodded. Then it's time for the next phase. With a flick of his hand, he brought up the star map, zooming in on the Jatari Dominion's homeworld Throughe, a fortress world, heavily fortified, believed to be impenetrable. Hadrian's voice crackled through the comlink. Are we really going after Throughe? Voss's reply was cold and absolute. Not just going after it. We're taking it. The war against the Jatari had been raging for 5 standard weeks, and humanity had turned it into a campaign of terror. Every counterattack was met with disproportionate retaliation. Every stronghold taken was left in ruin. Every attempt at negotiation was ignored. The Dominion had never faced an enemy like this. They had assumed humanity would fight like the others, defensive, desperate, fearful. Instead, humanity hunted them. By the time the fleet arrived at Throughe, the Jatari had lost all illusions of supremacy. The homeworld's defenses were formidable, but defenses meant nothing when the will to fight had been shattered. The battle for Throhe lasted only 12 hours. Sabotage teams, deployed in stealth ships, disabled planetary shields. Cyber warfare divisions seized control of the Dominion's own orbital defense grid and turned it against them. Shock troopers, clad in adaptive combat armor, stormed the capital, their advance relentless. And at the heart of the city, hiding behind his crumbling throne, they found Supreme Overlord Throughe, the once mighty ruler, whose threats had once echoed across the halls of the Galactic Council, was now a trembling husk of himself. His ornate battle armor was stained with dust and sweat. His compound eyes, once filled with contempt, now swam with terror. Voss entered the ruined chamber, flanked by Hadrian and a squad of elite operatives. His sidearm remained holstered. He didn't need a weapon. His presence was enough. Throthe's mandibles quivered. You cannot do this. Voss stepped closer, his voice calm. You wanted war. He gestured to the ruined palace, the distant echoes of detonations still shaking the city. This is war. The Jatari ruler took a step back, his claws scraping against the broken floor. The council, the laws of war. Hadrian snorted. You think the council will save you? He leaned in, his voice a whisper of amused malice. They're watching. The whole galaxy is. And they're learning. Throughe turned his gaze to Voss, desperation seeping into his tone. What do you want? Voss stared at him. Then, slowly, he spoke the words that would send shockwaves across the galaxy. I want your people to know what it feels like to watch their king dragged through the streets. Throthe's screams echoed through the throne room as the soldiers seized him. The transmission was broadcast across the known universe. Every species, every empire, every power that had once dismissed humanity as an upstart civilization watched in stunned silence. The supreme overlord of the Jatari Dominion, the ruler of a war-hungry empire, was paraded through the ruins of his own capital in chains. His golden carapace was cracked, his regal cloak torn. The same streets where his people had once celebrated conquest now bore witness to his humiliation. Some among the Jatari forces surrendered immediately, their morale obliterated. Others fought on, desperate to reclaim some shred of dignity. But the war was over. They just didn't know it yet. Back aboard the Judicator, Voss stood at the observation deck, watching as the last remnants of Jatari resistance collapsed. Hadrian joined him, his expression unreadable. They'll never forget this, Hadrian muttered. Voss's eyes remained fixed on the broken world below. That's the point. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Hadrian asked, What now? Voss exhaled, his tone devoid of satisfaction. Now! We see if anyone else is foolish enough to demand war from us. The Galactic Council, once content in its neutrality, now had no choice but to acknowledge reality. Humanity was no longer just another species in the cosmos. They were a warning, a king brought low. The capital of Throhe, once a shining beacon of Dominion supremacy, lay in ruins. Fires smoldered in the wreckage of its towering spires. their skeletal remains jutting into the sky like the broken ribs of a dying beast. The streets were clogged with debris, shattered war machines, and the bodies of the fallen. At the center of it all, Supreme Overlord Throughe was dragged through the streets, his golden carapace dulled with dust and streaked with his own ichor. His once majestic battle regalia had been torn away, replaced with iron shackles that clamped around his segmented limbs. Each step was agony. The chains bit into his exoskeleton, forcing him forward as a procession of human soldiers led him through the ruined avenues. The surviving Throughe watched in stunned silence from the shadows of shattered buildings, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and horror. Their god emperor, their unbreakable warlord, was nothing more than a prisoner. At the front of the procession, Commander Elias Voss walked with unshaken purpose. His face, lined with the weight of war, remained unreadable as he led the parade of defeat. Beside him, General Hadrian Locke strode with measured steps, his cold blue eyes scanning the remnants of the Dominion's once proud forces. "They thought themselves untouchable," Hadrian murmured. "Now they're learning." Voss didn't respond. He didn't need to. The moment spoke for itself. Every step Throughe took deepened the wound inflicted upon his people. Every second of his public disgrace ensured that the Throughe Dominion would never recover. A final reckoning. The grand courtyard of the imperial citadel, the heart of Dominion power, was now a tribunal of war. The cracked marble floors, once adorned with banners of conquest, were now covered in dust and blood. Human officers stood in silent formation, their weapons holstered, but their presence a reminder that humanity had claimed this world. Throughe was forced to his knees before Voss. His mandibles trembled as he looked up at the man who had undone his empire. "This is a mistake," the Overlord hissed, his voice hoarse. "Kill me now, and my people will fight for vengeance. Spare me, and we can—" Voss cut him off, his voice devoid of emotion. "You think this is about you?" The Overlord flinched as Voss stepped closer. "This isn't a negotiation," the commander continued. "This isn't about revenge. It isn't even about war." He gestured to the ruined capital. "This is a lesson." Hadrian folded his arms. "A warning." Throughe's breathing grew ragged. "To who?" Voss crouched to his level, his steel-gray eyes locking onto the alien's fractured gaze. "Everyone." The Galactic Council, the once silent spectators of this war, had received the broadcast of Throughe's capture. Every empire, every civilization that had once weighed humanity as an afterthought was now watching. For too long, the Throughe Dominion had been the specter of terror that loomed over weaker worlds. Their conquests had been swift, merciless, absolute. Their victims had surrendered, had begged, had bowed. But humanity had done none of those things. And now, with Throughe kneeling in chains, the balance of the galaxy had changed. The shattering of an empire. As the sun set over Throughe, Throughe war fleets across the galaxy began to break apart. Some fled into exile, their commanders unwilling to fight for a dead empire. Others attempted to resist, but their morale had been shattered. Isolated and leaderless, they were systematically hunted down by human strike groups. Even the most hardened Throughe warlords had to face the truth. Their dynasty was over. Back on Throughe, Voss stood on the balcony of the Imperial Citadel, overlooking the ruins below. The stars above, once patrolled by Dominion warships, were now dotted with human vessels, securing the final phase of their victory. Hadrian stepped beside him. Word just came in. The last Throhe war fleets are surrendering. Their admirals are either defecting or ending themselves. He exhaled. "It's done." Voss remained silent for a long moment before finally speaking. "No, Hadrian." He turned his gaze to the distant skyline, where the broken remnants of Throhe civilization lay in ruin. "It's just beginning. A new galactic order." The war had ended, but the echo of humanity's victory would ripple for generations. The Galactic Council, once indifferent to human affairs, now sat in silent recognition of what had transpired. Where once they had debated whether humanity was worthy of standing among them, now they debated how to avoid their wrath. No longer were humans the underestimated newcomers to the galactic stage. Now, they were a force that could not be ignored. And as the stars burned with the remnants of the Dominion's last resistance, one truth became clear to every empire in the cosmos. Humanity was no longer just another civilization. They were a warning,